Hey friends, welcome back. In today's show, we're going to debunk the myth that vegan and vegetarian diets are healthy for humans. I want to read to you some stats and figures and not come at this from a biased perspective because I am an omnivore, but I want to share with you some data and facts because I know a lot of you like science. So we're going to lean on some science from a paper titled Debunking the Vegan Myth, the case for a plant-forward omnivorous whole foods diet that was published very recently in the journal Progress in Cardiovascular Diseases by prominent authors like Lauren Cordain and James O'Keefe. And they go into the many health risks that are linked with a vegan or vegetarian diet that I think hitherto have been under-recognized by the activists that support vegan and vegetarian diets for their proposed improvement in supporting climate change and overall health improvements. But it's important to recognize that there are health consequences, and that's not fear-mongering. There are known health consequences when you go on a vegan or vegetarian diets that I think many people that for social or societal influences trend towards going vegan or vegetarian are not aware of. And let's talk about some of these, including depression and anxiety. This is something that we see so much in our culture today. Suicides, drug overdoses. We have people now, I think it's like 30% of postmenopausal women are on psychiatric medications, Prozac, Effexor, and the like. We know kids are now taking polypharmacy when it comes to amphetamines and antidepressants. And we know that more and more people are plant-based than ever, at least here in the West. And so it's important to recognize there is a strong scientific and academically studied, from a research standpoint, an association with mental health issues in going on a vegan or vegetarian diet. And as you can see here in figure 2, that is elucidated by why? The micronutrient deficiencies like omega-3 fatty acid deficiencies and zinc deficiencies. Hair loss. I see more and more people now with thinning or balding hair in both men and women. We know that protein deficiencies, zinc deficiencies, and iron deficiencies, among others, like silica, for example, lead to hair loss. And also the hormonal changes due to insulin resistance that are more common in vegan or vegetarians can lead to changes in hair loss and exacerbate that, particularly for women in the case of PCOS. We know there's also skin issues from zinc deficiencies and protein deficiencies like dermatitis that is figured here in figure 2a. Hypothyroidism. I mean, this is so common in our culture, unfortunately, especially again in women. And more women, there's 2 times more women that go vegan or vegetarian compared to men. And we see hypothyroidism is very common amongst vegans and vegetarians. Why? Probably selenium deficiency and also iodine deficiency. And this is important one important point that we need to really expand upon here is sarcopenia, loss of muscle mass. Sam and I were just talking offline. Often when you go to a grocery store, you see people that are buying clearly on a plant-based diet, plant-based chips, plant-based cookies. They might have some fruit and veggies in their shopping cart, but oftentimes there's a lot of cookies, crackers, treats, and bread products. Well, we know those are devoid of protein. We know protein is so important for maintaining skeletal muscle mass, improving muscle protein synthesis. We've talked at length about this with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, Dr. Sean Baker, Alan Argon. We've spoken a lot about the importance of prioritizing protein to help support muscle protein synthesis. But if you're not getting adequate protein or insufficient amino acids, such as leucine, isoleucine, valine, and essential amino acids that are not present in plants, you're going to have impairments in muscle protein synthesis, even if you're resistance training. So I think that is really important. And we know that sarcopenia and loss of muscle and poor body composition has health consequences. So again, if you're going vegan or vegetarian because it's purportedly less inflammatory or better for longevity and such, and you're not supporting this organ of longevity, skeletal muscle, that is going to be a problem because inevitably, as you age, you lose muscle. So we need to support that and consider adequate protein enriched in amino acids that are known to stimulate muscle protein synthesis like leucine, isoleucine, and valine, which are not found in most plant-based products. So that's really important to recognize. Again, and cardiometabolic health issues are rampant now. We've shared with you data from the NHANES, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Surveys, that found that only 6% of Americans are metabolically healthy. 94.8% some odd of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. Part of that is due to insulin resistance and loss of skeletal muscle. So I think this is one of the biggest risk factors with a vegan and vegetarian diet. And again, I'm just sharing with you the data. Okay, I am a little bit biased because I'm an omnivore, but I think that any vegan or vegetarian should know this information. And last but not least, the 2 major additional health risks linked with vegan and vegetarian diets are osteoporosis and bone fractures due to vitamin D insufficiency and calcium insufficiencies, as well as various anemias due to iron deficiency, as well as B12 deficiencies. I will throw in there, we know that creatine is a conditionally essential nutrient. We know that about 17% of Americans consume no creatine whatsoever. Why is that? Because creatine is found in animal-based products. It's found in breast milk. It's found in red meat, a little bit in chicken. The highest source of creatine, if you want to ingest herring, actually. Herring has 11 grams of creatine per kilogram of raw herring. So that's the greatest source. Grass-fed beef, for example, would have between 5 and 6 grams of creatine per kilogram. So even if you're eating a pound of red meat per day, you may be only getting about 2.5 grams of creatine. So we're going to continue on and talk about how humans are omnivores and talk about how the medical community is actually pushing for a plant-based diet, despite the fact that there's a lot of healthy user bias in vegan and vegetarian diet surveys and food recall type studies. But first, I want to welcome you back. Thank you for being here. If you're enjoying this content, please hit that like button and share this directly as a text message with a friend who may need to hear this information. Science-based information about ways to improve your health. We know that exercise is one of the most foundational things that you can do to optimize your health, improve your sleep, hormone status, blood sugar regulation, and more. A tool that is highly under-recognized is creatine intra-workout and post-workout. And that's why at MyoSense, we formulated the only creatine-containing electrolyte sticks featuring real salt, getting albion chelated minerals, 2.5 grams of creatine, also magnesium, taurine, and potassium, a lot of accessory nutrients. And we know that these nutrients help optimize the absorption of creatine. We know that creatine helps with the intercellular hydration. So this is a perfect combination to use before or during or after your exercise sessions. There's over 510 reviews over at myoscience.com from people like you who are trying to optimize their workout sessions to improve their health and their sleep and their mental well-being. So you should consider trying this and saving with the code podcast over at myoscience.com. That's MYOXCIENCE.com. So let's talk a little bit more about the big push towards a vegan or vegetarian diets from our medical institutions, including the American College of Cardiology, the American Heart Association, and more. In their 2019 guidelines on the primary prevention of cardiovascular disease endorsed a plant-based diet. And the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics stated that an appropriately planned vegan diet is healthful and nutritionally adequate and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of chronic diseases. And they say that it's appropriate for all stages of the life cycle, which I think is irresponsible, almost public health malpractice, because we know that DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, this is an omega-3 fat that is really critically important for brain development. If you're eating a vegan or vegetarian diet, mom and dad are eating that way, and there's insufficient levels of this critically important long-chain omega-3 fat that is important for helping babies' brains develop and improving cognition and focus and reducing the prevalence of ADD and ADHD and possibly even autism, that is not a good thing. Also, we know that iodine is going to be void, as we talked about, in a vegan and vegetarian diet. So I think there's a lot more nuance that is lacking from our health institutions that is influencing people to go vegan or vegetarian diet. But even as the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics say, a lot of folks are not appropriately planning their vegan or vegetarian diets. And I will tell you that even when I did short, 2 or 3 month stints on a vegan or vegetarian diet that was appropriately planned, soaking and sprouting nuts and seeds and grains and making sure that things are fermented and doing the like, I found a lot of gastrointestinal side effects and consequences. And when you hang out or socialize with vegans or vegetarians, they're open and honest about their digestive issues, burping, gassing, bloating, and the consequences of this, because humans are in between. We're omnivores. We're in between carnivores and herbivores in terms of our anatomical features and the morphology of our gastrointestinal tract, which we're going to talk about. So not only are our medical institutions and health organizations promoting vegan and vegetarian diets without nuance, we know that these diet sort of paradigms are influenced by academia. And we know that vegans and vegetarians are much more likely to be college educated compared to non-vegans and non-vegetarians. Why is that? Peer groups, there's a lot of talk about climate change amongst colleges nowadays. So that is part of it, but also there's a strong gender bias. We know that 2 out of 3 vegans or vegetarians are female, and the overall prevalence here in the US of vegans, and I think it's actually much higher in cities like Seattle, New York, San Francisco, LA, is that about 2.9% of females throughout the US are vegan, in contrast to only 1.5% of males. So there's a strong gender bias, and this could be the empathy that women have more so than men. But there's a very strong rate of attrition when it comes to vegan and vegetarian diets, meaning there are 5 times more former vegan and vegetarians than current vegans and vegetarians. Now, why is that? Well, people often try veganism or vegetarianism and revert back to their more omnivorous style diet because of what we're going to talk about right now. And that is the mental health issues, gastrointestinal issues, anemia, and much more. So The thing that we need to recognize is most people that go on a vegan or vegetarian diet, it's not appropriately planned and well formulated. So many of the plant-based diets are centered around refined grains, sweetened beverages, candy, desserts, baked goods, fries, chips, and all of these are particularly detrimental for cardiometabolic health. And when comparing these outcomes compared to, people who are eating omnivorous diets, there's not a statistically significant reduction in all-cause mortality. And I think that's important to recognize because, again, many people who are on a vegan diet have no problem consuming French fries, potato chips, bagels, cookies, pasta, bread, all of the things that Americans have been consuming that are linked with obesity, prediabetes, and cardiovascular related challenges. And so the toxic features of the standard American diet that cause obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and shortened life expectancy would not be averted by simply excluding animal-based foods. Rather, by reducing the intake of highly processed refined carbohydrates, deep fried foods, processed meats, and sweetened beverages that are ubiquitous in our culture. I think everyone agrees that we should not be consuming a lot of processed meats, charbroiled meats, salami, sausage, bacon. A lot of people on a low-carb diet do consume those, but I suggest not. Having more organ meats, eating nose to tail, slowly cooking your meats in a crock pot, slow cooker, having farm-fresh eggs and the like. I think that's really important. So we need to add a little bit more nuance here. But again, the micronutrient deficiencies that are associated with a vegan or vegetarian diet are linked with neurologic dysfunction, musculo-skeletal, also immunological issues because of zinc deficiency and so forth. And so they recommend that vegans or vegetarians should supplement with B12, with niacin, with vitamin D, with creatine, with other nutrients that are going to be deficient in a vegan or vegetarian diet. And so I think that's important to recognize because these are linked with cognitive impairment, immunologic compromises. We also know that there's increased rates of bone fractures, sarcopenia, depression, and anxiety. And so the specific deficiencies that one should consider if they have a friend or decide to go on a vegan or vegetarian diet, they should supplement with vitamin B12, with zinc, with omega-3 fats, other minerals like selenium, like iodine, and also probably supplement with protein because there's going to be a deficiency in protein like we've talked about. And I think it's important to recognize the incidence of psychiatric diagnosis among 4,181 adults. If you look here in green, and this is for depressive disorders, you see about 35% of people who in this particular data set were diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder. 35% of them identify as vegan. About 27% identify as semi-vegetarian. In contrast, only 21% identify as non-vegetarian. So there's about a 15% swing in the prevalence of major depression. Now, if you look here at anxiety, that disparity is even greater. You have about 35% of people who are diagnosed with anxiety report that they are vegetarian or vegan. In contrast to omnivorous individuals, people eating animal products. It could be processed meat and the like, but it's only about 13%. So that's almost a 20-point swing in the prevalence of anxiety. And we know that mental health issues are on the rise. We have mass shootings, right? We have people committing suicide, overdosing from drugs, reporting that they just don't feel well. There's fights all the time. There's viral videos of people fighting in the streets and at schools. I mean, this is like ubiquitous in our culture. I think it's important that we start to look at the micronutrient deficiencies, not only in just vegan diets, but also, the standard American diet, because we know that is not healthy as well. And if you look here, the co-occurrence of eating disorders in vegans or vegetarians is much higher compared to non-vegetarians. So that's important to recognize. So we should be looking at eating nose to tail. The micronutrients found in liver and organ meats have collagen and peptides and other micronutrients that are so important for skin, hair health, also eye health, are really important. And so it is important to recognize that people who avoid meat have challenges in these departments, not only just mental health issues, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, but also with their skin, with their hair, with their joints. In fact, there was an interview with Rich Roll, who's been a prominent vegan activist for a long time. He's a former attorney. He was addicted to alcohol and fast food in this, and he was a college swimmer, and he went plant-based and has created a lot of sensation around going plant-based. But he did an interview with Dr. Peter Attia. I'll play a clip here just so you can hear. He's reporting in his 50s, he's having a lot of joint pain, a lot of issues. He can barely ride his bike anymore, and he used to be an avid cyclist like myself.
Through my own experience of dealing with lower back pain, suddenly I'm in a position where I can't run without pain. And even if I'm on the bike for more than a couple hours, my back becomes intolerable. I've got an L4 that's kind of out of whack and sciatic pain. So I was like, all right, well, I'll swim. I'll get in the pool. This should be supportive. And I signed up for the Key West 20-kilometer swim, which was just this past weekend with the intention of competing in that. But when the yardage started to stack up around 6,000 or 7,000 yards per workout, like my back just couldn't deal with it. And I don't know if
was that in open water or with flip turns?
Well, it was flip turns.
Okay,
so I think it's all the turns.
Yep.
Like I just couldn't do a flip turn anymore without pain. But I wasn't doing any of the kind of gym work required to be balanced in that regard. And as a result, I have certain atrophies and I have like misalignment in my posture and all sorts of things that, now I'm realizing are super problematic, not the least of which is my balance is terrible. Like if I stand on one foot or I try to put my socks on, things like that, like it's hard. And that was like a huge revelatory moment for me to realize like, there's something terribly awry here.
He's having a lot of issues. And I think we're seeing more and more of that in the community where people are having joint pain and challenges, probably because they're not getting collagen and hydroxycollagen and the different collagen-like peptides from eating a nose to tail animal-based omnivorous style diet. And I think it's hard to make the case for a vegan or vegetarian diet if you're being consistent and honest with the biology, because humans are omnivores. We have enzymes, and the anatomy of our gastrointestinal tract is very similar and is omnivorous in nature. Like carnivores, we have assorted proteases in our gut that are designed specifically to digest animal protein. On the other hand, like herbivores, we have sucrases in our gut that enable us to digest fruits and vegetable matter. We can digest plants and so forth. So the great apes have a dominant colon that is very similar in function to that of ruminants, and that is adapted to ferment and digest bulky plant matter. In contrast, the human gastrointestinal tract is morphologically intermediate between carnivores and herbivores. It is characterized by a dominant small intestine that is effective for digesting both plant and animal-based foods. Humans also have shoulders, arms, and trunks adapted to enable us to accurately throw projectiles like rocks and spears at high velocity to capture animals in order to accommodate the micronutrients that we need to survive. And these unique anatomical endowments were almost certainly selected for their ability to augment hominin hunting prowess. And so you should definitely check out Eat Like a Human by Bill Schindler. In that book, he not only has great recipes that we utilize in our household, especially for my daughter and her school lunches, but also he talks about the evolution of humans and what makes humans so different from other animals is through the implementation of tools and accessories, we're able to do what most animals can't do inside our body. For example, a lot of ruminants, they have multiple chambers in their stomachs to digest plant matter. We have the ability to cook with tools and do things to pre-digest that plant matter that would otherwise be indigestible for us through fermentation, through cooking modalities, through sprouting, through soaking in those different processes. So I think that is important to recognize. Okay, now it is important to acknowledge that the scientists say that vegan diets are associated with some health advantages compared to the standard American diet, and that is obvious. And so we do see this healthier user bias in some of the nutrition surveys when it comes to people who are vegan versus people who eat a standard American diet. Most of the people who go vegan or vegetarian have some sort of healthy user bias. They're doing other things in their lifestyle that would differentiate them from people who are eating fast food all the time and getting dinner at, Walgreens, for example, which is sad. I've seen it all the time. It's really unfortunate. So obviously, going vegan is going to be better than eating a standard American diet in terms of reducing rates of type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, gastrointestinal cancers. But these epidemiological data sets show that there's a strong, healthy user bias. And that's important to acknowledge and recognize. And I think people don't talk about that. And the scientists say some of the vegan vegetarian health advantages may be due to a healthy user bias. Individuals who decide to follow a vegan vegetarian diet tend to be more health conscious and proactive about their health compared to the general population. And this bias would overestimate the health benefits of veganism reported in observational studies. On the other hand, the adverse health effects of vegan vegetarian diets are rarely discussed, even by our health institutions. And so eliminating all animal foods from a human's diet does lead to unfavorable health consequences that need to be acknowledged. So we know that too many people focus on just eating muscle flesh. And what they talk about in this paper is nose to tail eating. This is a buzzword that a lot of folks in the carnivorous or keto diet community have been talking about, eating things like organs and bone broth. And if you go to Latin America, if you go to Asia, and this is just part of how people eat an omnivorous diet, liver, pate, you have blood sausage, So this is part of the culture. And these folks have eaten this way for a very long time. Native Americans here in North America, before Columbus and all the Europeans came over, would eat all of the elk and the bison and use the tallow and cook with tallow. And now we're cooking with plant-based canola oil or soy oil or peanut oil, right? So we've moved away from how humans would ancestrally eat. And surprise, surprise, we're seeing the health consequences here. But eating organ meats is going to get you more vitamin B12, folate, iron, magnesium, selenium, fat-soluble vitamins. And specifically when it comes to preventing joint pain, I played that clip about Rich Roll complaining about his joint pain. We know that skin and bones are rich in collagen and hydroxyapatite, and that is effective for helping and maintaining musculo-skeletal health, possibly preventing osteoporosis, wrinkling of the skin, improving hair quality, because there's chondroitin. There's all sorts of glycosaminoglycans in bone broth, for example, and this connective tissue. So if you're just eating ground beef, for example, or just having ribeye steaks, although that could be low in carbs and high in protein, you're not getting this cartilaginous connective tissue that is so important for hair, skin, nails, joints, bones. Also the gastrointestinal tract. There's been many clients that I've worked with over the years who have SIBO and ulcerative colitis and these and the like, and they benefit from having these cartilaginous type structures. And also shellfish is rich in glucosamine. And so people with bone, skin issues, osteoporosis, very common nowadays, unfortunately, osteoarthritis. And so having these compounds can be helpful. And so these are not found, just to emphasize, not found in plants. Right? Creatine not found in plants. You're not going to get any creatine from kale. You're not going to get any chondroitin sulfate, glycosaminoglycan from kale or plant-based smoothies. And so it's important to recognize that whole animal foods are widely available in our modern food supply. You can get sardines. As I mentioned, herring is really enriched in creatine, about 11 grams per kilogram. So herring is great. We have bone marrow, bone broth, shellfish. Poultry products, including the skin. We know that actually chicken skin, a lot of people go to Costco and get boneless, skinless chicken, right? We know the skin is actually very enriched in some of these glycosaminoglycans and other nutrients that are so important for collagen synthesis and skin health. Also, liver and organ meats are now easier to get than ever. Oftentimes, if you work with a local butcher or you work with a local rancher, tell them that you want all the bones, the knuckle bones, the long marrow bones, and they will give them to you. Most people don't want that, and they put it in animal products or sell it back for dog food, but it's really important that you consume those as well. And so the scientists say that ideally these nutrients should be obtained through diet alone, not necessarily always supplements, and current guidelines do not recommend routine supplementation. However, supplementation with products such as collagen, organic bone meal, omega-3 fats, and glycosaminoglycan chondroitin may be helpful in some people, especially vegans or vegetarians or former vegans or vegetarians, especially if a diet is devoid in these nutrients. Now, it's important to recognize that these authors do acknowledge the problems associated with the consumption of processed meats. They say that frequent consumption of processed meat and overcooked or burned meat is particularly harmful in the context of the standard American diet and is associated with a vast array of chronic illnesses that are endemic in our culture, including cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancers of the gastrointestinal tract. So these authors acknowledge that eating those products that are very common in the standard American diet are unhealthy. And this is why cooking your meals from scratch, from locally grown sources and so forth, is going to be helpful. They also acknowledge the benefits of ferments. Now, I lose a lot of people that are in the carnivore keto community when I talk about ferments because they're like, oh, vegetables, plants are trying to kill you. Again, there's a nuance here. I think when you ferment vegetables, you actually make them much more digestible, improving bifidobacterium and lactobacilli, and you can make them more digestible and not have that feeling like you have a brick in your stomach when you eat raw kale or raw salads. And it's important to recognize that cultures all throughout the world, from the Japanese that ferment cooked soybeans to in Korea and other parts of Asia, where ferments are part of the culture. So fermented foods also play an important role in our nutrition throughout human evolution, as partially spoiled or fermented foods were consumed regularly. Long-chain menaquinones, such as vitamin K2, are derived solely from bacterial synthesis of fermented foods. Recently, pork tissue has been discovered as one of the richest sources of long-chain menaquinones, presumably because porks consume spoiled food, which contains bacterial-produced long-chain menaquinones. Menaquinones are part of vitamin K2. So the vitamin K2 family, MK7 has 7 chains of these menaquinones. MK4 has 4 of these menaquinone chains. And we've talked about that, how the vitamin K2, specifically MK4 and MK7, activate a calcium, an inhibitor of soft tissue calcium deposition, the matrix GLA protein that was recently covered in a recent episode. I will link it below. So a lot of benefits from ferments. And we know that fermenting dairy has been consumed throughout cultures. You go to Europe, people leave yogurt out, they leave the cream out on the table. If you've ever been to Italy or France, this is just part of what happens because it's been fermented. The natural curing of butter and creating of butter, that also improves the microbial composition, possibly improving gut health, digestion, and maybe even affecting mental well-being. We know that mental wellness and bacterial composition are linked. And so the consumption of fermented dairy, such as unsweetened yogurt, cheese, kefir, is associated with better health outcomes than unfermented dairy products such as milk and butter, probably through the lactobacilli and bifidobacterium that break down lactose as a function of that bacterial properties. So in conclusion, the scientists say, rather than veganism, a plant-forward, omnivorous, whole foods diet that emphasizes general intake of natural, unprocessed foods predominant from plants, ideally consumed at the start of the meal, is more compatible with evolutionary human biology. This diet should be rich in vegetables, nuts, seeds, avocado, olive oil, berries, and other fruits, along with some whole grains and legumes. And I will add on that, they didn't say this, that have been soaked and sprouted when you're consuming whole grains and legumes. Very important. We've talked about that on many videos. Importantly, animal foods are essential to balance in this diet, but these should be preferentially wild-caught seafood, pasture-raised meat and eggs, and fermented unsweetened dairy. Future prospective studies are needed to assess the cardiovascular effects of such a diet. And that's important because so few people in our population actually eat this way. But oftentimes the ones that do are the healthiest, but they're not being clinically studied. So I think it is important to recognize that the scientists in this paper are not saying that plants are bad. They are saying they should be consumed in an unprocessed manner. There's more nuance to the conversation. And that, I think, is what's lacking from the activism and the big push towards plant-based diets, is the lack of nuance when it comes to avoidance of the processed foods, avoidance of the fried foods, of the sugar, and all of this. Just because the bag of chips says plant-based, or the Oreo cookies or the Reese's peanut butter cups say plant-based, it doesn't mean they're healthy. So it is important to acknowledge there's a differentiation here when it comes to all sorts of diets. And hopefully you got some of the highlights, the top level highlights from this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be honored if you could hit that like button, share this with a friend, and let me know what you think about in the comments below. And we'll catch you on a future one down the road. Bye now.